Welcome back. Well, today I am joined by Congresswoman Katie Porter, and it's been so long since we've talked to you, and I know you've been busy, but welcome and thanks for coming back.
Absolutely. Always my pleasure to join Laguna Woods.
Now, as we've seen for the last, several months, the pandemic has been the forefront of all of the news, but there's a lot of good things that are actually coming out of that. And you've got a few things that you want to tell us about. So we'll start with the Medicare Economic Security Solutions.
Right, so Medicare is one of the most successful American programs we've ever enacted, providing health care to seniors, and there's room for improving Medicare. We all know that, particularly with regard to prescription drugs, but this is really generally a success story. It's not perfect though, and one of the ways that seniors get tripped up is that there's a 10% penalty per year that somebody delays enrolling in Medicare. And this means that people who don't know, who are still working, and people who are working later and later into life might get tripped up by this. And this penalty can really quickly add up and become unaffordable. So while we want everyone to enroll, to know the rules, we don't need to hit people with this kind of really strong penalty. So what my bill would do is to reduce and cap this penalty.
Okay. Now, tell me, go into a little bit more about, how it will certainly help our seniors.
Yes, so what happens right now is that seniors who may be approaching Medicare eligibility, they might still be working, they might be covered under a spouse's health care, and they may therefore, realize they've gotten to that Medicare age but not take any action. And without them even realizing it, penalties can start to accrue. And 10% penalty per year can really start adding up. That's under current law. So what I've done is partner with a really terrific Republican colleague from Washington State, Representative Jamie Herrera Butler. And we've come together to try to cap these penalties and make sure that seniors aren't getting what's really the equivalent of like a surprise medical bill. But in this case, it's coming from the federal government with regard to Medicare.
Okay, penalties. Now, I don't think I'm aware of this, well, primarily because I'm not on Medicare, but why would there be penalties?
Well, we want people to enroll in Medicare. We want to be keeping track of them. You think about this as the same kind of way that we have rules around enrolling in selective service when you turn 18. So we want people to be signing up for Medicare. We want a big pool of people in it. We don't want people waiting until they need a huge operation and then showing up. So it's just like other insurance programs in that there's sort of an open enrollment period, but here it comes around that magical Medicare age. And so, but some people, like I said, they'll still be covered by private insurance. They may not want to make use of Medicare. They still need to go and sign up. But this bill will reduce the penalties if that date slips by.
Okay. All right. Great. Now let's go on to the other things that you mentioned. And you've got a Mental Health Pandemic Act. What exactly is that?
Well, mental health is one of my top priorities in Congress. It's one of the things that I've heard from constituents of every age and every part of this community about the importance of being able to afford and find competent, quality mental health care. And this is actually an increasing issue for our seniors, many of whom started to get care before they went on to Medicare. And so deepening the provider network, for example, of people who do mental health providers and who take Medicare is an important goal. The particular bill you mentioned, the Stopping the Mental Health Pandemic Act, recognizes that COVID-19 hasn't just taken a toll on people who've gotten physically sick, it's also taken a big toll on people's mental well-being. And that's everything from grief at loss of loved ones, being unable to gather with family, isolation, anxiety. And so what this bill would do is provide more funding for our community mental health providers so that they can better meet the need out there for mental health.
Yeah, many of our services here in Laguna Woods Village have been focusing on that as well, because they get calls from lonely seniors who are feeling isolated and severely depressed. So, I mean, there are a variety of hospitals in the area and providers who can help with mental health. But, maybe this is something that is definitely needed, going forward, like you said, to help everybody and nationwide, not just elderly, but also some of our teenagers are having issues too. Would this help any of those as well?
Absolutely. This would apply across the age spectrum because the additional funding would go to state and local government programs. So if there's mental health wellness groups that, for instance, are being run by the city of Laguna Woods, it would also help nonprofit organizations. And there are some really good ones that focus on teenagers, but we're seeing mental health kind of across the age spectrum spike. Kids too are lonely, cut off from school, working parents who are trying to simultaneously juggle working with supervising their children in online school. So this bill is really there to strengthen the mental health network so that when people need help, it's there for them. And we've seen in some instances really strong demand of our community providers. I talked to some people recently who are psychiatrists and psychologists, and they said we're working overtime. So many people are coming to us and need our services right now. We need more help. And that's what this bill is designed to do.
That's awesome. And one thing you and I were talking about off camera is that all three of your children happen to be in school today while you're doing your Zooms. And I don't think there's not one parent out there who wouldn't be ecstatic if that was their situation, is to make sure that kids are back in school, because number one, as we said, some of the teenagers and younger kids are missing that sociability of being in school, also the learning process. But then our parents, like you said, they got to work out of the house, yet they're still trying to care for their kids at the same time. So, I think everyone could certainly benefit from this.
Absolutely. We need to be focusing on getting schools reopening. And I'll tell you, as a parent of three, as a single mom of a high schooler and a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, about a year today when the public health emergency went into effect and they announced schools were closing, it was right then and there that I started thinking about what do we need to do to make sure that schools can reopen safely. And I think that's the key word. It's not just about reopening. It's about reopening safely. And we know more about this disease than we did before. We know that things like ventilation can help, that making sure that people are wearing masks can help. And we have vaccines now that are getting into the arms of our teachers and school staff members, people like bus drivers and others. This is really, really an important step toward being able to reopen. And it's going to benefit kids. It's going to benefit their learning as well as their social emotional development. It's also going to benefit our economy, because we're seeing a lot of people, particularly women and women of color, who are exiting the workforce because they have to take care of children.
Yeah, it's been tough for sure. Now, let's move into the American Rescue Plan, because I have a feeling that that's going to help many of those folks who have been at home caring for their children.
Absolutely. So the American Rescue Plan is the name of the bill that Congress just passed, both the House and the Senate, and President Biden signed into law last week. And this bill has several key components, but I like to think about it as a couple different buckets. Bucket one is shots in arms. That is providing more funding for vaccine distribution and continued funding for testing and tracing. And as we have less community spread of COVID, tracing can actually be a better tool to make sure we don't have any further outbreaks, particularly of these variants. So the bill contains funding to state and local health departments to help make that happen. And I think we're all seeing vaccine distribution is ramping up. We've had our biggest days of vaccine dissemination in the last few days, but our state and local governments need resources to make that happen. Yeah. The second big part of the bill is addressing the economic pinch that so many families are feeling, behind on their rent, behind on their mortgage, unable to make ends meet, having trouble putting food on the table, and hours-long lines at food banks, even here in Orange County, in South Orange County and other places. So what this bill would do is provide a $1,400 payment for every adult or child, and it does phase out at certain income limitations, but it's estimated that about 85% of American households will receive a stimulus payment. They've already hit bank accounts in many, many cases, so we're really working hard to get people this help right away. And related to that, and one of the things I'm really excited about in this bill, is the expansion of the child tax credit. Many, many people remember that starting in the 60s and 70s, we were talking about child poverty, and an incredible toll it takes, not just on kids, but on our overall economy. This bill would expand the child tax credit and is estimated to cut child poverty in half in a single year. And that is great news for all of us, whether we have kids or not, whether we're struggling to make ends meet or not, because child poverty is a barrier to those kids learning, getting the best jobs they can, and being able to be globally competitive.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, I was reading about that, and there has been quite an increase in some of the child tax credits. And now, is that also increased in care credit too, if you needed to have your child cared for?
Yes, so parents can use this child tax credit for whatever they need to. And so they could use it to put toward the cost of child care. They could use it toward making sure that their children have good, nutritious food, are not overcrowded. And generally, the research has shown us that particularly for lower income families, when you give them a little bit more money for their children, the first thing they spend it on is more food and more nutritious food. And so particularly toward the end of the month, a lot of kids go hungry and a lot of kids don't get good nutritious food. So this is gonna do that. And also the American Rescue Plan is gonna deliver billions of dollars to our state and local government right here in California, not just to the state of California, but to Orange County, for the Board of Supervisors to use, and to local city governments. And we've seen cities right here in Orange County put this money to good use. For example, programs to help small businesses who maybe fell through the cracks in the Paycheck Protection Program or need a little bit more help. Rental assistance for people who can almost make their rent, but not quite, and they're at risk of getting evicted. So it contains a big chunk of money for state and local governments. And I'm really proud that here in Orange County, our local mayors, regardless of party affiliation, stepped up and joined with me in calling for these resources and said how important it is to them to be able to keep balancing their budget and keep helping the people in their community.
Well, the good thing that you mentioned is helping people pay rent, because, you know, a lot of landlords, you know, they're losing an awful lot of money. And in fact, they're at risk of even losing the building itself if they don't have the means to, you know, help the people or make improvements or things like that. I mean, or to even be able to pay the taxes on that. So would you imagine that this would help those folks?
Well, it's going to help renters be able to pay their landlords. And many of the landlords, of course, will also get these stimulus payments that they can put toward dealing with whatever costs they have. I do think that we have to recognize that particularly for smaller landlords, seniors who maybe are renting out their home and move to Laguna Woods, for example, that rental income is a main source of income for them. So I'm continuing to work on a bipartisan basis in Congress, talking about what we can do to help make sure that renters start paying that rent. We've given renters a break and we've prevented the evictions, but that hasn't done enough to help landlords be able to cover their expenses as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, and one last thing real quick. We've got the HEROES Act that's part of this American Rescue Plan. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so the HEROES Act was the name of the prior bill that Congress put together. And so that was the bill that the House passed last year in May. And then because of gridlock, because the Senate wouldn't take it up, not even take it up and vote it down, but just wouldn't debate it, a lot of what we had in the HEROES Act got folded back into this. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you see things like assistance for schools, assistance for vaccine distribution, that state and local assistance. These were things that were needed almost a year ago. So it's long overdue to get this help. And we know that our local governments can't be stretched any further. They're facing layoffs of law enforcement, of first responders, of emergency services, of community support. So it's really, really important to get this money out there. It's everything from Meals on Wheels to vaccines. This is really a bill about making sure that America can recover.
Okay, perfect. And I appreciate you saying that again, because I know that you said it earlier in there, but I wanted to make sure that everybody heard that. So thank you so much for spending the time with me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. And we'll be right back after this.